I'm on it. It's
Thank you.
recording. We are recording.
Oh, yay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this fun and hopefully very informative presentation on special education. My name is Chelsea Simcata, and I'm a social worker, part of the Youth Behavioral Support Team, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth.
Hello. Nice to see you, Chelsea.
Yeah. So we're pretty excited because this is a topic that I am definitely passionate about. And so, with the hopes of sharing as much information as we can, we are going to try to go quick through the first few slides, but just some thoughts. So, if you have any questions, please feel free if you've joined us today on Zoom to reach out and chat. If you don't happen to have any questions, but you know maybe some of the people that you work with, the consumers, or maybe some family members of yours may have certain questions, ask them on their behalf so we can talk about it, because this presentation will be recorded. And so if you did not join us via Zoom and you're joining us by watching the recording, thank you for joining us. I feel like I'm saying joining us a lot, but thank you for being here with us. We look forward to sharing as much as we can. And if any questions come up when you're watching this recording, or even if you're attending via Zoom, we have an email at the end that you can reach out to. So without further ado, we shall get started.
Do it.
Okay, so as we begin, it's always good to kind of think about life. And when you look at this picture, I think we could probably get some emotions, right? And I did not caption this, but I thought it was very perfect to the topic we were talking about. So it says the two of the greatest qualities to have in life are patience and wisdom. And so as we continue this presentation on Zoom, we just ask that you have that patience and wisdom with us. Elizabeth and I have done several presentations together, and we like to try to have some fun, and we will try to laugh and have a good time. I'm not actually sure, Elizabeth, if anyone else finds this funny, but we'll be laughing.
Yeah.
So, yes, have some patience with us. We will do our best to make sure this is a smooth presentation, but if not, or if you have some input to help us along with it, again, that chat button is very helpful. So when I mentioned before that we were going to kind of go through these first slides a little faster, initially these were going to be poll slides. And so it's important to kind of identify who's joining us in Zoom or who's watching this in recording. But instead of doing the poll, I just wanted to have a brief moment while I talk of reflection, of finding out who we are, right? That's a great question to ask, whether we're professionals, we're caregivers, whether we're just interested in the topic of special education, or maybe we have family members or children of ours who receive special education services. It's always good to know what role do we play, or maybe what role we want to play in the future when trying to advocate for those that we either work with or live with or care about. So we aren't going to take that poll, but just think about throughout this presentation. Again, it's going to be a lot of information we're throwing out there at you guys, but just always think, who am I? And which is a deep question, right? But what role do I want to play regarding special education? And another poll we're going to kind of go through, because this is pretty heavy with information, but the goal of this slide was really just to figure out more about you. And so what brings you to this presentation? And because we're not doing that poll, I think that, when I think about what brings me to this presentation is my past experience as a school social worker. I think that even while working in schools, my passion was there, but I didn't know how passionate I was until I left the school system and I realized, wow, this is a really a significant area of interest for me. And so as we continue with this presentation, please know that I don't claim to be an expert. I'm just someone who's very passionate about this topic and would love to share as much information as I can, because it's definitely, special education in general can be a big mystery for a lot of people. And so it's always great to have the opportunity to dialogue about it. But as we continue with this presentation, again, not only are you thinking about what role do you want to play within special education, or within your family or for your consumers, but also what brings you to this, right? Are you willingly engaged, or did you just find out your child's been diagnosed within the school system? What is motivating you to learn more? Because identifying that can be very helpful in learning or figuring out what you want to learn more about. So as we continue the next few slides, we're going to take a look at what are the purpose, goals, and outcomes of this presentation. So the purpose of this is to share just an understanding of special education. This is just going to be a foundational experience, right? So like I mentioned before, not an expert, but definitely someone who's passionate. And so when we go over these slides, just keep that in mind, that if you feel like there are some pieces of information missing, or if you feel like you want to know more about that topic or item that we discussed, that's great, because again, this is just the foundation. This is just a basic understanding. You may find in this presentation that you already know this information, and that's great, because then you can definitely be a great resource to your family or to the families you work with. So the goals and the outcomes of this presentation, the hopes, right, is to have a better understanding of what the special education process is. And by doing that, we're really going to review some of those terms that are used in special education within the school system. Part of understanding those terms in the process of special education, which probably throughout the presentation I'll call special ed just for short, but we want anyone watching this to feel more confident in their knowledge, to feel more confident in their understanding of how to better advocate for their families and for their children and for the community, right? And as we become more confident in our knowledge base, then we're more confident to advocate in those moments. Because for those of you who have attended maybe IEP meetings or really school meetings in general, it can feel very overwhelming. And when any topic is regarding our children, we can feel very passionate. And so it's good to have that understanding of the terms, to have an understanding of that basic knowledge, so then when we are confident, we can advocate in appropriate ways. I know, Elizabeth, sometimes when I'm confident, I advocate in maybe not the most appropriate ways, but the one thing, in other presentations that we've done together, which I think you can access on the Health Plus Facebook page, is that you got to give yourself that patience, right? And you got to give yourself that understanding of, you know what, maybe I didn't respond right in that one situation, but moving forward, I'll try better. And that's something that I know myself, I personally try to do.
Yeah, especially when you're working with different, services provided. You're sitting around a table with a lot of different stakeholders and just trying to really navigate. I know it's been helpful for me in situations is just kind of knowing at what point do I absolutely need to step in? At what point am I just mediating some sort of conversation or explaining? And yeah, I can definitely see that point of it. Sometimes you need to check in with yourself to be like, okay, what type of role am I trying to play here? And what is it trying to benefit this conversation that we're having? And the kiddo and the client are definitely at the center of it all, for sure.
Yeah, I think you make such a great point, because as we go through this, it's a lot of information. I mean, even reviewing it, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of information to try to take in, especially if it's the first time you're ever hearing this. And so give yourself that patience and understanding. And just like Elizabeth said, that your child should be at the focus, right? And so if you're feeling confused, or if you're feeling upset or frustrated, just remember, take those deep breaths, try to give yourself some forgiveness and understanding, and hopefully going over some of these terms and some of these concepts will help out in those situations. So as we continue, again, it's going to be pretty heavy on information, but we're going to offer opportunity to ask any questions if necessary. If you're watching this on the recording, you won't be able to ask questions at this time, but again, at the end, there's going to be that email that you can send any questions to, and we can try to address those. But going forward, we're going to take a look at special education, Section 504 plan, the individualized education program, which is commonly known as IEP. I'm going to switch our screen so I can see that. Free appropriate public education, which you may hear people call FAPE. And then review of existing evaluation data, which people in schools will call the READ. So a lot of acronyms to know. So special education, it's a term that a lot of times gets just used very vaguely. I mean, I can use it sometimes very vague, like, oh, special education, but a very basic understanding is just the instruction designed to meet the unique needs of a child with different abilities. And so I think that's the important thing. I know a lot of times language and the laws and the rules, we hear disabilities, just like disability. And it's always important to know that, you know what, maybe by technical terms, it's a disability, but I know I try to view it as just a different ability. We're all unique. We all have differences. And if your child does qualify for special education, that doesn't mean something's wrong with them. It just means that they had those different abilities and that special education within the school system can address. So then we're on to free appropriate public education, so FAPE. So essentially what FAPE is, it means that any child with a disability or a different ability should have and will have under the law the same access to education as a general education student would. So they have every right to attend school. They have every right to receive instruction just the same as their peers. It will get more in detail, but that may look differently depending on if maybe assignments need to be different or the curriculum taught is a little different. But FAPE essentially is that students with those abilities have access to education. So then we look at the Section 504 plan. Now the Section 504 plan is essentially, if you want to look at it, and you don't have to, but it's, I would say the step before an IEP, or it could be instead of an IEP or that individualized education program, your child could have a Section 504 plan. And within that plan, there would be identified accommodations for your child to receive in order to be successful, whether that is academically or socially in the school environment. And so sometimes if your child does not meet the eligibility to receive special education services in the form of an IEP, they can receive accommodations with the Section 504 plan. And then we take a look at that READ. So that's a review of the existing evaluation data. And so in summary, what a READ is and who is completing the READ, so school staff would complete the READ. And within that, they're reviewing all existing evaluation data. They're taking a look at all the information that they have within the school system. They're checking in with parents. They're trying to gather as much data as they can to gather information together for the next action step. So let's say hypothetically, Elizabeth and I were going to do a READ together for Joe Schmo. Joe Schmo is our kid we're looking at. So once we put all that information together, we'd then be able to see what action steps we're moving forward with Joe. Are we moving forward with doing a formal evaluation? Are we moving forward with academic testing? Are we moving forward with social emotional testing? The READ is really gathering information and then determining what to do next. So then we look at that IEP. And so an IEP is the document, and it's for individuals ages 3 to 25, and it outlines students' educational needs, any goals, any programs or services they may receive from the school, and it's reviewed at least once a year. We're going to get into detail throughout this presentation on what your rights as the parent are, and that's definitely the perspective that I'm going to be speaking to, but it's also something that as maybe professionals or just community members, we can always keep in mind, because oftentimes we are a great ally to have for our families and a great advocate. And so those IEPs can be called to be held anytime throughout the year. But within that, we're going more detail, but it really just shows what services or accommodations a child needs and what the school is going to do to meet those needs. So within the IEP, you have goals and objectives. And so throughout this, I'm going to speak more to the social work perspective within schools because that's my experience. And so when we take a look at goals, we want them to be measurable. We want to know and evaluate the current level of performance. We want to identify any target behaviors or outcomes that we want. And we really try to be specific when we are doing that. And then we're going to identify the method of measurement that we're not only tracking those goals, like progress made on those goals, but also if those goals are achieved. And so when I think of an example, and I say specific, so this may be a vague example, but so we look at, let's say Elizabeth is my student and she's having difficulties with emotional regulation. And so I could choose, let's say, Elizabeth. So if we look at current level performance, 50% of the time, let's say Elizabeth is able to regulate herself in an appropriate way. But the other 50%, she likes to throw desks and chairs, right? And so that's her current level of performance. She's at 50%. That's her baseline. So the target behavior and the outcome that we're looking to achieve is to decrease those moments where she feels like she needs to express herself that physically, right? Give her opportunities to express her frustrations or her overwhelming feelings in a healthy way, right? So we're going to try to take a look at that. And oftentimes from the social work perspective, you know, when I was writing, how would that be measured? It's documented observation or through standardized assessments, depending on what the goal is. So you'll see a lot of different things written in that section of the IEP. The biggest thing that I suggest for parents to do is just ask questions. If you see a goal that maybe you don't feel is relevant, or maybe you don't feel that you understand, just ask, because there are plenty of times where even myself as a professional, if let's say, for example, I was reading a speech and language goal, I don't necessarily know their language that they use. I don't necessarily know what they might mean. And so I would also ask questions. So that's the biggest thing that I suggest, is ask questions. There are no silly questions. There's nothing to be embarrassed about if you don't know, because I know Elizabeth and I are always asking questions.
Yep.
And so then changing in eligibility, this is something that's important for parents and families to know. And so when we look at changing eligibility, we have to look at certain criteria or certain items. And so one of those or two of those items would be aging out. And so if the child is older and is aging out of receiving services, or if they're graduating. And so we look at those transition periods in life. If your child is, let's say, in middle school, elementary, or just starting high school, or even ending high school, and there's a change in eligibility, what we really want to look at is how is that going to impact or affect the child's education, right? So if I'm receiving services for an emotional impairment, and I'm 12th grade doing okay because I've had so much support from the school, so many interventions have been implemented in my schedule. If we were to take that away, how would that impact me? Would I be able to be successful in the academic setting if those supports were taken away? So that's something that we really need to take a look at. So now we're going to kind of briefly go over, and we'll be, maybe not briefly, we'll see, but we're going to go over your rights. And it's so important. And, you know, one of the things I want to note that when I share this, it's not saying that the school does not want you to be knowledgeable of your rights. One of my other biggest suggestions is to work closely with your school system. Work closely with those who are working with your children on a regular basis. It's okay to have conflict and it's okay to disagree, but it's so important to work closely with them so that you and your child are getting the support that you need. And so when I went over the IEP, at the bottom it says calling an IEP. As a parent or a guardian or caregiver, whoever has that custody over the child, or whoever's caring for that child, you have the right to call an IEP at any time throughout the year. Now, please mind, I do not have the current directive of schools on what's happening during this current pandemic, but typically you can call an IEP at any time. So let's say I have an IEP that just got an IEP meeting, so you get together with school staff and you review that information, and I maybe don't agree, or I feel like there's been a drastic change. I can call for an IEP to be held. The other thing to consider is who to invite to an IEP. So as that parent or in that role of caregiver or guardian, you have the right to invite community agencies. And so if you're involved with working with Health West, or you have a caseworker, or you have someone in the community that you feel either plays a big role on your child or has a big role in their lives, you can invite them to that meeting. And then what to do during the meeting. There's, like Elizabeth said earlier, sitting down to those meetings can be so overwhelming, right? It's a lot of people, it's a lot of information. And if you add on top of that, if there's been a conflict, maybe due to behavior, or if there's a disagreement that you have with the school or vice versa, it can be kind of overwhelming of what to do. And so my suggestion is take notes. Do your best to ask as many questions as you can. If you feel uncomfortable in those situations, try to advocate for yourself and bring someone along with you that can help you get your point across or get the message that you want to share across. So for example, the families that I work with, if they so choose, they can have me attend those meetings as well. And I could help also kind of be that mediator in those situations, or I can help express when there's that conflict. Which leads to if you don't agree, right? If you feel that you don't understand or agree with the current action steps that have been identified or current recommendations, it's your right as a parent or guardian to, you don't have to sign anything, right? And so in the IEP at the end, it's asked that you sign if you agree. If you don't agree, that's the opportunity to continue to work with the school system to get to a point where you feel comfortable. You don't have to sign anything that you don't feel like you're comfortable with. And sometimes that's just an extra meeting. Let's go over it. I have these questions that I didn't get to ask during the IEP, or some questions came to mind when I went home. And so definitely make sure that you're comfortable with whatever plan is created, because that is impacting your child. And then procedural safeguards. So procedural safeguards are something that should be given to you at each IEP. Depending on the district that you attend, some teachers or staff give it a little more often, but you should at least be receiving it once a year. And those safeguards are essentially your rights. And so I know when I was working in schools, we would joke with parents, like, if you ever had a hard time falling asleep, read these safeguards, because they'll definitely put you to sleep. But the truth is that there's just so much information in those either packets or pamphlets that the schools hand out. But it's all about your rights as a parent and your rights as a family receiving services from the school. And so it's very important that you have those. And all the information, I should note, that we're reviewing right now, if you go on to the Department of Michigan Special Education Office, or the Office of Special Education, they have all these resources for you. And if for some reason your school gave you the procedural safeguards and you no longer have it, go online and check that out. I told you it's a lot of information. And so we don't have too many attending the Zoom, but if there are any questions at this time, please feel free to send them out.
There are.
Oh, all right.
So,
let's see.
Yes, we have a question. So, is there a specific time frame? This is from an audience member. Is there a specific time frame, like 30 days before, in which schools or families should put together the list of people who should be involved with the IEP to give them ample time to ensure they can present for an IEP meeting, as opposed to like 48 hours?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so let's say we have a student who has an IEP coming up. The school will typically send an invitation, not only by reaching out by phone or email, but they'll send a letter in the mail to you as the parent or the family, or I should say they should in some way inform you that this meeting is coming up. At that time, it really depends on relationships, right? So if I am the parent and I have a close relationship with the resource teacher or the teacher at the school, I'll say, I want so-and-so from Health West to attend the meeting. And then they can also reach out to those individuals. It's really a delicate balance. I think it's a hard question to answer, I guess, because as soon as you know, the better, right? And so it really depends on communication with the school, because they are going to try to set up a meeting that works around multiple people within the school. And so if you have someone that you want to invite, it may fall on you to invite them. And so ideally, the school would be reaching out to you a few weeks ahead of when the IEP is due. And then I would suggest reaching out as soon as you find out, to those individuals that you want to attend. Another way that you can do this is just to know that an IEP, again, is held at least once a year. And let's say today is June 8th, I believe. So if we have an IEP today, in June 8th, next year, the IEP is due by June 7th. And so you will always know that, okay, I should expect the IEP to be one day before it was held this year. So you can kind of try to plan ahead that way. I know it's hard to remember, but that's another way you could do that. I hope that answered it. Or it was a really long way of not to answer it.
Well, we haven't had a rebuttal question or anything like that, so I think you're good.
All right, we'll roll with it. But that's a good question. I mean, it's really hard to know when should you be doing these things. And sometimes our initial response may be to just rely on the school to be sending invitations or the school to be doing certain things. But school is really busy, and it's our responsibility too to make sure that we're inviting the people we want to invite. And that's where that communication really comes in. So let's say Elizabeth is my caseworker and the IEP was scheduled and I thought she can come and she can't. That's where that communication comes in with the school to say, I want my caseworker there. Can we reschedule and try to work around that? All right, so now we get into discipline. And so we're going to take a look at that manifestation determination, and we're going to look at the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So that's often called an IDEA. Again, a lot of information, so bear with me. But an MDR is required within 10 school days of any decision to change the placement of a child with a disability because of a violation of a code of student conduct. And so essentially, in summary, an MDR, or that manifestation determination, if your child is suspended and receives special education services and they're suspended or expelled and it goes beyond 10 days, the school is required to hold a meeting to determine if the student's behavior is a direct result of their eligibility for special education. And if it is, then there's a certain path of discipline they'll take. And if it isn't, then your student would be treated as a general education student. So when we take a look at that, so if the behavior is a result of the youth's disability, so let's say I have an emotional impairment, or I have a cognitive impairment, or I have autism within the school. If I behave in a certain way that falls within that eligibility of my disability, then the action steps the school is to take is to return the student to the previous placement. And so let's say I'm in Grand Haven. So if I was attending Grand Haven High School, I'd return back to the high school. Remedy deficiency of IEP implementation. And so what that essentially means is that the school is going to take a look at the plans in place. And so let's say they have an IEP, or they have a positive behavior support plan, which is often called the PBSP. They're going to take a look at that and as a team determine, is it working? Do adjustments need to be made? And a lot of times the school will and should reach out to you as a parent to have you a part of that process. And then the next step is to address the behavior. Although our children may have different abilities, and sometimes those behaviors will be a result of their eligibility for special education, the behavior still needs to be addressed, especially if the behavior is unsafe or harmful to themselves or others. We need to make sure we are accommodating for their eligibility, but also that that behavior is addressed. So if your child does something that is not a result of their disability or is not a result of their eligibility for special education, again, like I mentioned, they're going to be treated like a general education peer. So the discipline procedures that a general education peer, depending on what was done, will be in place. And so, and then providing services. And so it's making sure that, again, you're reviewing what was in place. You're taking those steps to make sure, was this based on their eligibility, wasn't not. And then you consider that functional behavior assessment. And so let's say I maybe have a specific learning disability. So maybe reading is my deficit and I get into a fight at school. That fight is likely to be determined not based upon my eligibility. And so I may be suspended for a few days. And within those days, depending on what time, FAPE, remember that free access to public education still needs to be provided. And so that's with the services. And then the school is always trying to assess, are the plans that we're doing working? Does something need to change? Do more services need to be provided? Does something need to be changed so the students doesn't continue that behavior? So then we look at that idea, right? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so the quote, I won't summarize it because it does better just to read it. The federal civil rights law that ensures eligible children with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education, so there's that FAPE, in the least restrictive environment. And so you hear that a lot within the special education realm, that least restrictive environment. If I could summarize it, hopefully the best I can, what that means is that we want to make sure that our children, regardless of their ability or disability, receive the same education as general education students, right? And so let's say that, we'll go back to, if I have that specific learning disability and it's in reading, well, I don't think I need to be in a EI classroom all day, right? I would just need some services. In EI is emotional impairment, and some districts have certain rooms for children that need intensive services or resources, but I would just need something to address my reading, right? And that's the least restrictive environment. So when we look at IDEA, we need to think about that process of discipline and the process of removal. And so we have to look at if 10 school days or less. So if it's more than 10 consecutive school days due to a violation of the school's code of conduct, or if it's that non-consecutive school days over 10 due to a violation of the school's student conduct, or if there's certain circumstances. So if the child brings a weapon to school, if they have used or possessed drugs on campus, or if they cause harm to themselves or others. And so it states within that idea, which again, you can look into more detail, and there's a lot of information on this on the Office of Special Education website for the Department of Michigan. So it says that protections for students not determined eligible for special education related services, and appeals for parents or districts if they disagree with the decision. And so that's what this act really addresses. Again, everything really goes back to rights. Your child, doesn't matter what their disability or different ability is, they have rights. And you as their parent or caregiver also have rights as well. So these pictures are thrown in. Maybe it's just for me because after going over all that information, I think my brain is fried. But if there's any questions at this time, it's a lot of information.
There are no current questions, Chelsea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and just to remind you, if you're watching this as the recording, at the end, I will point out that email that you can respond to. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to the email, or if you just have comments in general, it's always good to get any feedback possible. So when we look at eligibilities, and please note there may be a few that I've missed, there are a lot, right? And so within each eligibility, there are different criteria that you have to meet within the school system. And so the reason that I say that is, I know from my social work perspective, the medical diagnosis for autism is different from the criteria a student has to meet or a child has to meet within the school system. So a lot of times there's that frustration from families, well, I have an outside diagnosis of autism, but in school they don't meet their criteria. That doesn't make sense to me, right? And so that is that moment, those are those moments where really connecting with your school and expressing those concerns and expressing, I don't understand, right? Because there are a lot of different requirements that go into these eligibilities. And please know that it's not your school district that comes up with those requirements or criteria to meet those eligibility. It is the state of Michigan. And so that's where, again, that patience and understanding, because as a parent, when you want to make sure your child gets all the resources they can, we can be frustrated, right? And a lot of times in our heads as the social workers in the school, it's like, we didn't make these rules. We're just doing what we can. So familiarize yourself with the different eligibilities within the school and within special education, and that would be very helpful to you as you proceed if you have any questions. Now, I know I skimmed through that because this is a really topic-heavy presentation, but if we don't have any questions, maybe we can just appreciate this adorable cat.
So cute. I love it.
Yeah, if only I could have more. So the big takeaway as we look at this, we're doing great on time.
You are doing great on time.
Excuse me. So when we look at this, those big takeaways of, you know what, why am I watching this presentation, right? So the first one I want to talk about, again, are your rights. You have rights as a parent. You have rights as a guardian. If you have questions about those rights, that's where a little research comes in handy. Look at those procedural safeguards. Check out the Department of Michigan website for education and special education. Excuse me. Take a look at that because your child has rights. And the most important thing to note is that, you know, I've worked in several different districts. And in not one of those districts have I ever experienced a moment where I saw a school intentionally try to take away someone's rights, right? But there have been many moments where families feel that way. And that's where that communication comes in. Because conflict is a natural part of life, right? I'm going to jump to the conflict bubble. But the last thing that we need to do is make a situation worse, or have a situation get worse because we're feeling maybe emotionally explosive, right? And so you do have rights, and the schools are there to work with you to help provide as much support and resources for your family and for your child. But if there is a moment where maybe you're not agreeing with an assessment, you're not agreeing with something that's happening, or you feel like you're not being understood appropriately, which is natural. I mean, we have that in our daily life. My biggest suggestion is to take a moment to kind of process through those emotions. And that can look differently. Some people maybe like to meditate. Some people may like to talk. If you know you're going into a meeting that might be a little tense, it might be calling up a friend and kind of letting your true emotions out so that you can then attend that meeting and be a little more level-headed. But please know you do have, again, rights. And so if you feel that you need help beyond just regulating your own emotions in order to resolve that conflict, there are resources out there for you as parents and as family members. At the end of this presentation, there are a few links that I recommend you check, and one of those is for a mediation organization. They specialize in just helping out sometimes tense situations, and sometimes the situations don't even have to be tense. It can just be challenging, because finding out that your child needs needs special education services, or it's been a long time coming, it's a challenging process. It's a lot for us to at times wrap our head around. Again, I touched on communication. It's so important because your school and the staff there are there to help your child. But as I always say, and I continue to say, you are the parents, you are the experts with your child. And so in order for the school to appropriately provide your child with services, it's key that you have an active role in that system, right? A lot of times we can say, oh, the school's got it, they've done this a million times, but each child is unique, and we want that parent input. And question anything you want to question everything, but never be afraid or hesitate to ask those questions. I mean, like I said, there are so many acronyms, there are so many different lingo and language that is used within the special education world and within school districts, that it makes things confusing. I mean, many a times as a school social worker, I would leave meetings like, I need a break. And that's just because it's so much information shared. And so it's so important, ask those questions. If you ever feel uncomfortable to ask those questions, bring an advocate with you. If you have a caseworker at Health West, bring them along. If you feel like you want to type up your questions or write down your questions ahead of time of the meeting, do whatever you need to do in order to express any concerns or comments you have. So now the big question is what to do now, right? Because schools and attending school is so different due to this pandemic. And I would be lying to say I have any true concrete answers for you because I think each school district is still determining what next fall looks like, right? But my biggest suggestion is just try to meet the needs of your child now, right? Try to have an organized schedule. Try to be understanding because you have now, as a parent or caregiver, taken on that role of teacher or special education teacher or gym teacher or social worker that they used to meet with, right? Your role is so different. And so my biggest suggestion is keep that communication with your school district, even over the summer. It may be challenging because school staff work so hard. They earn that summer off, right? But keep that communication, send those emails, make those calls, and just try to have patience with yourself and with your children. Now, I think I've shared a whole lot of information, and so I'm just going to show this next slide. So this presentation is a part of the Parent Educational Series. And those series, I believe, Elizabeth, are all on the Health West Facebook page, right?
Yeah, and if you go to Google Health West groups, there'll be a little thing that says virtual groups as an option to click. And then if you go down on that site, you'll see this series and the link that gets you here. And then underneath will be a YouTube channel, and it'll have all of the series so far. Yeah.
Perfect. And we're doing, I believe, our last series or our last session is next week, Monday. I will be there with Alicia, and we're going to actually go through some coping strategies and skills and really make it a hands-on experience. And so if you're looking for a good time to maybe de-stress, or if you're looking for great resources to use with your children, I definitely recommend joining us then. If you're unable to join us, it will be recorded. I'm sure it will be way more goofier than this one, but it will be a good time. So now this email right here, the Autism at Health West, I recommend sending any questions you have there, or if you have an assigned worker at Health West, reach out to them if you're viewing this presentation and the recording. The biggest thing is we would just want to make sure we help you in any way we can, especially regarding special education, if that's a topic of interest or importance to you, because it can be pretty confusing. But when you take a look here too, you can follow these links. A lot of them take you to that Department of Education for the state of Michigan or the Office of Special Education. They're great resources to have. And here are also some more resources. I know that was a ton of information. I appreciate you guys sticking with me on this. You know, I say it's a topic of interest, but now I'm worried you all think I'm boring. Because there's a lot of information, and it's an interesting topic of interest.
I think it's really good to know exactly what your rights are and to know as a parent what kind of conversation to have with educators and other people around that table, because it can be super daunting for sure to be a part of.
Yeah, it's an intense experience, but when you have that right team around you, it could be so beneficial to your children.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I thank you so much. I'm so proud of being within the time limit. Woo-hoo.
Yay, we did it. I'm gonna end recording now.